2026 guidelines gives lifestyle as a Class A recommendation. So with that said, that means that lifestyle should be the very first thing you should be talking about versus just putting you on medications and ignoring the fact that there's things that you can do in your lifestyle to help reduce your risk of a heart event in the future. So the research shows that even a genetic predisposition for heart disease, healthy lifestyle habits still produces a 50% reduction in adverse outcomes. So even if you do have a high LPA, 50% of it can still be managed by lifestyle. Hi guys, so happy to be back on the podcast, and I'm returning with some updated news about the new cholesterol guidelines. So it has been 8 years since we've had some new targets on where our cholesterol should be, but most importantly, this year's guidelines is more focused on how the practitioner should be managing our heart health risk instead of just looking at one number and throwing meds at it and just chasing lab values. So that's what the 2026 new guidelines on cholesterol is focusing on. It actually has a new name. It has the name of the Management of Dyslipidemia instead of the guidelines on managing blood cholesterol. So it even has a different tone to where we're focusing now on management versus just chasing numbers. Because LDL, HDL, those are not the only two numbers that determine someone's heart risk. There's so many other cholesterol particles that often go not measured or not monitored. And that's why whenever people who we thought were healthy, they suddenly have this cardiovascular event. You're like, my goodness, they were the picture of health. How did they have a heart attack? And so we're now looking at things a little bit differently to catch those individuals who we think are no problems at all. But also on the flip side, for those who have that conversation with their doctor every year and they're like, we need to get this number down, we need to get this number down. And you guys are not on the same page. You're like, I eat healthy. What do you mean? The number is high. So we're able to really see the full picture versus just this 2-second clip of what's going on with your blood cholesterol. So with that said, what does it mean for us? Whenever you're going to the provider, if your provider hasn't been up on the news, you need to remind him or her like, hey, there's a new cholesterol guideline that you need to check this particular number or this particular value, which we're going to go in today. So first is now we're focusing on prevention, which is if you've been in the American healthcare system, we're not always the most preventative. We're pretty much reactive to everything. But now we're focusing on prevention, where now we have a new risk calculator that really pulls data from a broader range of people to really assess someone's risk. And also, they have removed race as a variable in calculating someone's risk. And they've added other things like a person's kidney function into the equation as well. So with that said, we're looking at more of just these generalized pockets of who's at risk. We're looking at more of a broader spectrum. And typically the preventative or the heart risk calculator that we've used in the past, it's only looked at your risk in the next 10 years. This new calculator looks at your risk in the next 30 years. So we're really being proactive where we're looking further out, and also to try to screen people earlier. So especially if you are 20 years old, 30 years old, and your cholesterol numbers have been riding high, we really need to dig deep and figure out what kind of cholesterol you have and not waiting until 40, 45 years old to really start putting some things in place when in fact you've been exposed to bad cholesterol or atherogenic cholesterol that can cause a stroke or a heart attack for years, which limits your treatment options whenever you've had that much exposure because you started out with high cholesterol early. So with that said, there's a test now that we should look at that goes beyond your normal cholesterol panel, and it's called lipoprotein A, or LPA. LPA is a number that independently raises or red flags for someone's cardiovascular risk despite what their LDL says. So the goal for the LPA is for it to be less than 50. So if your LPA is greater than 50 or greater than 125 nanomoles, that's indicative that you have a 1.4-fold times risk of developing some type of cardiovascular risk. So with that said, your conversation with your provider is a little bit different, where you guys are focusing on different treatment options, lifestyle, medication, changing if you need to get additional testing to really figure out what kind of LDL you have because of where this number puts you. Also, if you, let's say, go get the LPA test and test ran on yourself and you come back greater than 50 milligrams per deciliter or greater than 125 nanomoles, depending on how the lab measures your number, you need to pull a first degree relative like your mom, dad, sister, brother, first degree relative, and have them screened as well, because lipoprotein A is genetic. So it means that you can't change your DNA. You can't change the way you eat or exercise to lower this number. So if you are the first in your family to get this LPA measured and you come back high, go grab somebody and have them to get screened as well. So that way you guys can all have that conversation together. Now, the most frustrating part about all this, you get this data, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves now, because now that we're looking at more prevention and looking at person's individual risk and all of that, the FDA doesn't have an approved medication yet to specifically lower this LPA number. So there's several medications in late stage trials right now that are being developed to help lower the LPA, but right now we don't really know. We don't have any options other than just to know where you are, and then also shift the focus on the things that we can control to not exacerbate this genetic risk of having some type of cardiovascular risk, cardiovascular event. So with that said, what can you do now? One, have the conversation with your provider to get the LPA test done for yourself. But also, two, if you have diabetes alone increases your risk of cardiovascular disease because of the prolonged exposure of high blood sugars, definitely stiffens your arteries and cause things to block up just because you have so much sugar in your blood there. So that's a different thing. So if you have diabetes and this elevated lipoprotein A, then you guys may have to get a little bit more aggressive in terms of how you guys control your cholesterol numbers. And so what that looks like is, if you have cardiovascular disease and you've already had a stroke or a heart attack or you had a stent placed, then we may focus more aggressively on the LDL, where your target may be less than 55. Also, they may run another test called ApoB. So it's apolipoprotein B, where it really gives a clear sense as to what your LDL is really doing, meaning how much of this bad cholesterol that you have circulating that can actually cause a stroke. Because just because your LDL number is high, not all of it may be atherogenic, meaning could block your arteries. You just have a high amount of it. So with that said, if you do have type 2 diabetes or other elevated cholesterol issues, your doctor may run another test, is the ApoB. And that matters because it's a different type of particle, it's a different risk, it's smaller, and it causes the most arterial damage. And a normal cholesterol panel does not measure ApoB or lipoprotein A. So to pause for a minute, Russ, what does all this mean? It means that we really need to get granular in how we look at our cholesterol, period. Just having, a blanket statement, oh, you have high HDL, you have low LDL, you're good. If you have other conditions like type 2 diabetes, your doctor needs to be running the ApoB and the lipoprotein A. Also, too, if you've never had the conversation around lipoprotein A, but you know that you've been trying to lose weight and get your numbers down, but no matter what you do, the number comes back high, get the lipoprotein A, because you may need to change things up. Or maybe one of those things where you're like, you know what? You just make a lot of cholesterol, but you're good. Don't worry about it. So in terms of what the guidelines say around medications, now that we're looking at things a little bit differently, is statins still remain part of the foundation to help lower the bad cholesterol. However, if you have an issue to where you've been on statins and the lipoprotein A is high, you may need to switch the type of medication, moving from the statins and maybe adding other medications like Zetia, which basically removes the cholesterol out of your body, keeps it from being resorbed. Or you may need some PCSK9 inhibitors, which is targeting more of a dramatic reduction of the LDL. Or if we have high triglycerides, maybe you focus on the triglyceride component there. So you get really specific about what medications that you're prescribing, what formula you're going to put together. First, just putting on this blanket statin drug, which may not be giving you any benefit at all anyway. So it really helps the prescriber make a better call and better clinical judgment. So what can you do right now in terms of a lifestyle perspective is that 2026 guidelines gives lifestyle as a Class A recommendation. So with that said, that means that lifestyle should be the very first thing you should be talking about versus just putting you on medications and ignoring the fact that there's things that you can do in your lifestyle to help reduce your risk of a heart event in the future. So the research shows that even a genetic predisposition for heart disease, healthy lifestyle habits still produces a 50% reduction in adverse outcomes. So even if you do have a high LPA, 50% of it can still be managed by lifestyle. So what does that look like practically? Focusing more on adding more fiber, more plant-based, because at least that will help reduce the amount of cholesterol that your body is absorbing and recirculating and depositing in your arteries. Fiber is the broom that helps sweep it out the door. Also, most importantly, not just vegetables, but soluble fibers. Or for carbohydrates, making sure you're eating things that are whole grain, things that have like beans and lentils. And that soluble fiber actually helps bind up the bile acids in your gut that directly helps lower your LDL. So eat your vegetables every time you have an opportunity to eat. And those who have type 2 diabetes, it makes it even more essential that you manage your blood sugars. Insulin resistance drives up elevated triglycerides and it as well as LDLs. So if your blood sugar is off, your lipid panel is often going to reflect it. This is a metabolic connection that most people miss in their cardiovascular visits. Your cardiologist is looking at the LDL and missing the fact that it's the blood sugars that's driving all of this excess fat in your blood because you're pumping out more insulin. And as you guys know, if you listen to previous podcasts, is that insulin is a fat storage hormone. So when we got our blood sugars in control, the less insulin that we're pumping out and having to use. So the bottom line is know your LPA, ask by ApoB, understand your actual LDL target for you based off of your risk factors, and don't wait until something goes wrong to start managing your lipids. The guideline is now explicitly asking your doctor to start the conversation earlier. So with that said, make every meal a decision towards your health, and you have more power here than you think because we're not looking at just blanket statement, blanket numbers. If you need more support on this, definitely click the link in the show notes or reach out to me at www.russpowellnutrition.com and book a consultation, a free discovery call with me. I will hear from you guys in the next